Today we're going to talk about the utilities. Apologize for my voice, but it is actually getting better. Um, there are two different flavors of utilities. One is a regulated utility, and a regulated utility is owned by investors as stockholders. And there's publicly owned utilities. Sometimes they're owned by the municipality, a city. Sometimes they're a public utility district. They are owned by the members of that utility, very similar to a bank. Anyway, they're publicly owned, so the regulated utilities and the public utilities have similar building structures, though they're somewhat different, but they can have drastically different rebating processes. The information that we find on utility bills, and I'll bring up a utility bill in a little bit here. We'll go over a few of them. The utility bill, when I ask for a utility bill, I'm asking for all of this information. I don't care how much money they pay a month for power. I want to know how it breaks down. I want to know what rate, tariff, or schedule that they operate on. Each tariff or schedule has a different power rate that is associated with it. I want to know what their kilowatt rate is. Kilowatt hour rate is the total kilowatts consumed over a billing period. I want to know what their demand charges are. Their demand charges are based on their peak usage. Typically, it's the highest 15 minutes in a given billing cycle. So if a billing cycle is 30 days, the utility will look at the highest 15-minute period, and that will determine what their demand charges are. I want to know what their billing cycle is. I want to know what their billing address is. A lot of times the businesses will have more than one utility bill because they have more than one meter serving more than one building. And if we have different building addresses, we need to break out the rebate applications appropriate to each one of those addresses. We need to know what the account number is, and we need to know what the meter number is. And all of that information is included on our typical power bill, which looks something like this. This is a Nevada Energy power bill here. You see it's got an account number, got a customer number, it's got a premises number, it's got the billing cycle in it. And down here, each one of these KWHs adds up to the total cost they pay for power consumed in KWH. Now, you can see occasionally one of these might even be negative. They might be getting a credit for one of these, various factors that are involved in it. But in this case, they paid 9.7 cents plus 1.5 cents plus 0.5 cents plus 0.7 cents plus 0.1 cents plus 0.1 cents. All of that up to about 11 cents a kilowatt hour is what they're paying for power. If you give me a copy of the power bill when you do the initial survey, I can actually use this number in calculating what the energy costs are for that particular location. If you do not give me this number, I'll just use a generic standard number that is pretty close to what they actually pay. This particular bill does not have any demand charges associated with it. And you see it's only $387, so it's a real small bill. Puget Sound Energy. Puget Sound Energy, here's the billing address. Here's the account number. And then I move down here. They have commercial 31 is their rate schedule. And this is how much that they actually consume. Now I look down here, they have a basic charge. They're going to pay that number whether they use any electricity or not. So it does not really apply to our calculations. But net electricity, they pay 6.7 cents and 6.8 cents. There was a change of rate between August and September. So the rate changed a little bit, but they also pay on the demand side $10.46, for the demand, or $10.57 for the demand charge. We don't worry too much about reactive power. Now we got more kWh's down here. It's 0.003, 0.002. All these get added to this 0.68 that's up here to get their final total electric charges. Xcel. In the Xcel one, you can see that it's pretty simple. They have premise numbers, they have account numbers, they have billing addresses. Here, kilowatt hours, 7.9 cents, or 0.079 cents, plus 2.9 cents, plus 0.3 cents, plus 0.4 cents. And then the demand, distribution demand is $6, and general transmission demand is $15. So these people are paying $21 for their demand charges for their power consumption. That's a big number that does really show up in your ROIs. This one is ETO, that would be Pacific Power. This customer has one meter, and this is his power consumption for the meter and his demand. And then a KW demand at $1.15, demand at $6, so $7.15. And then KWHs, so 0.1 cents, so 6 cents, 7 cents, 8 cents, 9 cents. They're paying about 11 cents for power for on the KWH side. That's what a power bill looks like. Regulated utilities, those that are investor-owned, have their power rates set by the State Public Utility Commission. Once it's set by law. The Public Utility Commission enacts a law that governs the power rates. Rebates from regulated utilities are also set by the Public Utility Commission. That establishes all of the policies and the rebate amounts and the procedures, and again, is set by law. Once the PUC is involved in it, now it's a law that the utilities and the customers all have to follow. Publicly owned utilities are set by, utility rates are set by a locally elected board of directors. And the same way with their rebates. These can get to be really interesting. Because a lot of times these locally elected board of directors, only real interest is to keep the power bill as low as possible. And sometimes they'll see rebates as being contrary to keeping the rates low. They would rather see the rebate dollars put towards providing lower power rates for their customers. So some public utilities have some really strange rules when it comes to rebates, all the way from we don't give any to we only give to residential customers to yes, we have a program, but we're going to run out of money in the second week of January. So it just really depends on the individual utility and what their attitude is towards energy conservation and energy savings. The big question is, what should a utility pay its customers to not purchase its products, the electricity? Utilities are always being pressed upon from several competing directions. Well, we have climate warming. We have environmental concerns from emissions, and mercury from coal-fired power plants, for instance, particulates from oil-fired power plants. They're also pressed on costs of energy. And certain types of energy production facilities produce costs that are much lower than other costs. For instance, a hydro facility has an extremely low cost of operation. has a very, very high cost of construction. Utilities have to provide their system with 2 times the actual demand, 2 times in what's called rolling capacity. That means they can lose half of their capacity and still meet their demand requirements on their system. So they're basically running twice the amount of power that they need at any given time. That means that they need to have readily available power to offset sudden losses. The extra power sits in power plants that are not being operated at full capacity. The utilities are faced with the reality of continued growth in demand. In part, it's due to population growth, but it's also significantly impacted by the power choices consumers are making. It was really interesting. A few years ago, California looked at what the impact was of big screen TVs. And what they discovered is when there was a big price breakthrough in big screen TVs, and all of a sudden, Amazon and Walmart and all these guys were selling big screen TVs for a fraction of what they had been costing. There was a big demand for big screen TVs. In 1 year, California lost 10 years worth of energy conservation effort to big screen TVs just because people switched over to big screen TVs, which use a lot more power than the standard televisions that they were using. Lost 10 years worth of conservation. Now we're seeing the transportation sector switch from liquid fuels to electricity. The transportation sector consumes 40 to 60% of all of the energy consumed in the United States. All of the energy, all of the electricity, everything. Now we're seeing that 40 to 60% shift over into the electric side of the equation. And the utilities don't necessarily have the generating capacity to pick up that load. There is one benefit to some degree in that a lot of this charging for cars is taking place at night when the demand cycle is lower. So the utilities can take advantage of existing infrastructure to meet that demand. But in locations like the Pacific Northwest, we use nighttime to store energy behind the dams acting like big batteries. So when the nighttime demand goes way down, the dams can cut back on power consumption and conserve water and thus electricity for the following peak period. Now we're seeing the transportation sector, eating into that savings that's behind the dams, and the utilities are really beginning to grapple with, okay, how are we going to meet the new demand cycle, which does not give us a quiet period in the middle of the night any longer. Power plants are very expensive. They take years to build. And utilities and their respective regulators are looking at these costs of new capacity versus the cost of reducing demand via rebate programs. So you see utilities like Puget Sound Energy very aggressively going after rebate programs. They've done the math. It's much cheaper to buy conservation than it is to buy a new power plant. Much cheaper. So they're basically buying new power via their rebate programs. All utilities are going to use a cost effectiveness test to determine what the actual rebate will be. Now we have rebate schedules, and most of you probably seen them. We pay $4 for a tube light, we pay 30 cents for a kilowatt hour, etc. That's the baseline, but they also have a cost effectiveness test. A cost effectiveness test, once applied, can result in a lower rebate going to the customer. For instance, if you have a parking lot light with a 1,000-watt metal halide in it, and we put in a 300-watt LED product, and that parking lot light is operating 12 hours a day, 365 days a year, we're saving a ton of energy. So the cost of that 300 watts really becomes pretty insignificant. On the other hand, a building has a wall pack. It has a 26 watt uh, compact fluorescent light in it. And we replace that with a 14 watt compact fluorescent. We're only saving 14 watts. That 14 watts will be going out over the course of the whole year, results in a relatively small savings. If the cost for that wall pack is high, say it's up in the $100 range, the calculation for the resource cost may get out of whack. The cost for that 14 watts may exceed the cost effectiveness level and thus change the rebate to zero or near zero. This total resource cost calculation is something that I have to pay attention to when I'm putting together your applications to the utilities. And I can do some manipulation of where costs are allocated to improve the rebate on those products that might not otherwise get a decent rebate, but include the total cost by adding it back in someplace else. The utilities, all utilities, whether regulated or public utilities, follow a pretty basic process. What they're looking for is energy savings. That's the bottom line. They want energy savings. And to that end, they need to know how many fixtures there are, what the current wattage load is, and how many hours per year they operate. So that's why we record the hours by line, where a conference room might be 4 hours and a manufacturing floor might be 24 hours. A restroom might be 2 hours, a closet might be 1 hour, a hallway might be 12 hours. The utilities are going to be trying to confirm those operating hours because it's operating hours times wattage that determines what the current energy consumption rate is. Then they're going to look at what we're proposing. And they're going to look at the wattage of the new products. And does the new product qualify meeting their performance criteria? Usually that means DLC or Energy Star or some similar standard. Once they've determined that it meets their standards, they look at the energy difference, and then they use the same hours in the calculation to determine what the energy savings are going to be for the project between the existing and the new. The utilities will report to the customer a project cost, energy savings, and an ROI. Those numbers are usually different than the numbers that they see in our proposal. For instance, the utility does not include lighting maintenance costs as either a current cost or as a cost saved, while our ROI does include maintenance costs. Maintenance costs are a significant number in the cost of the existing lighting system, and they generally go to zero or near zero once they've switched to LEDs. So switching to LEDs does represent a significant cost savings to the customer that is not reflected in the utilities report. Not all components in a project are eligible for a rebate, and these are not included in a preliminary application. For instance, in Nevada and in Portland, tube lights do not get rebates from the utility. If a project has a bunch of tube lights in it, those tube lights are not going to show up as a cost in the project cost the utility reports to the customer, but it will show up in the invoice that the customer sees from us. And there's going to be a difference there. And you need to understand why that difference is there. So when your customer goes, hey, how come this says this number and you guys say this number? It's because we have included maintenance costs. They have not. We have not included products that are not eligible for rebate in the project that the utility has evaluated. It may be necessary for me to adjust line item costs to meet TRC requirements. So it may be that I'll show a wall pack at $20 to get a good rebate on it, whereas the invoice to the customer shows $100. The $80 difference is picked up elsewhere in the way I put the invoices together for the utility. The invoice the utility sees is not the customer's invoice. Rebates also have caps. We have the cost effectiveness test, but we also have caps on how much rebate can be given for any given line in the project. And that can be as low as 50% of the total cost of the line, or as high as 80% of the line cost. And I find sometimes that if by raising the cost or the apparent cost of the item in the application, I can increase the amount of the rebate because I've run into the cap on it. In that case, other areas of the invoicing will go down to compensate for what I went up in that location. The utilities may, and typically do, conduct a preliminary walkthrough to confirm counts, wattages, and operating hours for each line of the survey. I encourage you reps to attend those walkthroughs so that you can become familiar with what it is the utilities are looking for. Now, remember, the utilities are not our friends. And in many cases, utilities see contractors as necessary parasites. They deal with their customers directly, and they will just offhandedly deal with any contractor. Some utilities we develop good relationships with, but for the most part, all utilities are there to look after themselves and themselves only. So when we're working with the utilities, we want to be honest, we want to be straightforward, we want to answer their questions, but we don't want to necessarily get into any long stories about the project. We do not want to divert their attention away from the matter at hand, which is the application that's in front of them. After they've done a walkthrough, they may make adjustments in the pre-application, and then they will issue a pre-approval for the customer to sign. All of our rebates are estimates subject to final utility approval. We're pretty bloody close on our estimates as long as we haven't manipulated the estimated rebate in the proposal. We keep maintaining a 15% cushion in our proposal process so that we have a little bit of room. If some things get dropped out, it's not going to have an impact that the customer sees. And it's always easier to go back to the customer and say, hey, guess what? Your rebate's going to be 10% higher than we thought it was going to be, than to go back to the customer and say it's going to be 20% lower than we thought it was going to be. So we always refer to our rebates as estimates. The only real rebate number that's solid is the final approval that comes to utility after the post walkthrough. At the conclusion of a project, we'll submit an as-built application to the utility with a final invoice reflecting the items included in the application. Does not include items that are not in that application. This invoice is not the customer's invoice. Usually the utility do not show that invoice to the customer. Sometimes they do, though. The utility may and typically does conduct a post walkthrough, and I have seen them take apart fixtures to check part numbers to make sure that the part number of the product we specified in our submittal was the part number that actually got installed in the project. This is actually a good thing. When all this started out, 8-10 years ago, we had a whole lot of people in the LED world who were fly-by-nighters working out of the trunk of their cars, trying to get away with just about anything they could get away with. This step proves that we play by the rules. We install the products we said we're going to install. And so there's no problem with the utilities opening up a fixture and checking the part number on it and comparing it to the submittals that we've provided to the utility. Utilities generally will not increase the size of a rebate, but they may reduce a rebate based on their walkthrough findings. Usually we're real close. I work with the utility through the pre, and we know where we are after the pre, and as long as we don't run into any big changes in the course of the project, the final is going to come out about where we expected it to come out. But they generally will not increase the size of the rebate. There are a couple of exceptions. In Portland, I can get up to 5% increase in the rebate without getting prior approval. The Puget Sound Energy does not give a rebate, they give a grant. And once the grant's set, it's set, and that's it. They cannot be increased for any reason. That's the utilities. So next week, we're going to go over the application process with the utilities for the rebates, but that's what the utility process looks like. Uh, okay, so I'm open to questions now. Anybody have any questions?
Guys can always email you with questions.
Yes, you can.
All right.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome on. Have a good day and go out and get them.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Bruce.